Welcome to the Mad Deep Show, and I am so excited to have one of our returning guests with us, Mellisa, our really well-known HoneyBee, and Anthony.
Yes, thank you so much for having us on.
So now, Anthony, you've kind of formed a coalition with Bee. Tell us what's going on with your life and how you came together with her.
I remember the first time I actually reached out to her, it was simply just, to create some general content on each other's channel. I was really interested in her channel. I'd followed her for a little while. I wasn't sure if she was following me at the time. She might have been, but I reached out to her. We had a really awesome conversation for like 3 hours. It was like a meeting of the minds. And I knew at that point that I wanted to continue working with this person. There's just certain times, certain experiences that you have, and for sure that, there's a, like I said, a meeting of the minds. You just feel like this feeling that we're both on the same wavelength. So it was then that we started talking a little bit after we first met and first started making content, and we had these ideas of making a documentary and actually trying to combat in some shape or form child sex trafficking, getting down to the roots of it and how the whole system itself functions, not only in the country but in this whole world. So that's kind of where it all started with us, and we've become really, really, really good friends. I would trust her with my life to this day. So
there you go. That's quite a compliment.
Actually, we started the filming process when we did the Pedogate March. That was kind of like where the documentary was kind of like going to be towards, is the Pedogate March. It was like a nationwide march, and everyone had their own little marches going around the country, and we chose to do it at the Gay Pride Parade to raise awareness to the LGBT community that the pedophile groups that I'm currently fighting right now were trying to inject themselves into the LGBT. So it started as that, and then it kind of formed into this like tornado of just research, and we really thought it would grow into something more. Even then, we're like, well, this could be good for like a 20-minute, but like, couldn't it be more? Couldn't we talk to people, travel? And then we got into the CPS and the families that wanted to contact us, and it just kind of snowballed from there into like this amazing project, which was supposed to be done in January, but that's not going to happen because we really want to talk to a lot of people. We don't want to leave anybody out, especially some of these more serious cases where people are actually in the throes of court right now trying to get their kids back. So it's very dynamic documentary. I think there's many facets to it that even to this day we're like, okay, do we add this in there now? Like, it's still it's not in its infancy per se, but it definitely is still growing. Mm-hmm.
My report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping. Having worked with probably 300 cases statewide and hundreds across the country, and in nearly every state, I am convinced there is no accountability in child protective services. I have come to several conclusions. 2 or 3 are: 1, that poor parents, not always, but oftentimes, are targeted to lose their children because they do not have the wherewithal to hire an attorney and fight the system. That caseworkers and social workers are very often guilty of fraud. They withhold and destroy evidence. They fabricate evidence, and they seek to terminate parental rights unnecessarily. That the separation of families and the snatching of children is growing as the business grows, because state and local governments have grown accustomed to having these taxpayer dollars to balance their ever-growing budgets. That the bureaucracy is huge. Look at who is getting paid. State employees, attorneys, court investigators, guardian ad litems, court personnel and judges. There are psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, counselors, foster parents, adoptive parents, and on and on. All are looking to the children in state custody to provide job security. And that the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect in 1998 reported that 6 times more children died in foster care than in the general public, and that once removed to official safety, these children are far more likely to suffer abuse, including sexual molestation, than in the general population. Think what that number is today, 10 years later. The Adoption and the Safe Families Act, set in motion first in 1974 by Walter Mondale and later in 1997 by President Bill Clinton, offered cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out of foster care. In order to receive the adoption incentive bonuses, local child protective services would need more children. They must have merchandise that sells, and they must have plenty so the buyer can choose.
A lot of people hear about these things and they think, you know, since the state stepped in and did this, there must be something there. And that's the biggest lesson I've learned from this, is that that is not the case.
And then I learned that the state only gets money if they put the kids into care. Keeping them at home costs money.
Some counties offer $4,000 to $6,000 bonus for each child adopted out to strangers.
What was hidden before is coming out. Today, you can find just about anything you want on the internet and the dark web, and the portions of the internet people have no idea exist. Anything you want is out there. If you want something, if you've got the money, you can buy it, or if you got the juice, you can buy it. What we're fighting for are, I'll show you reality if I may, and this is reality. This is reality. This is a little boy. That's reality. That's a boy in a cage. And sadly, is a victim.
The guys that were in that area and parked outside my farm and stuff, I mean, sorry, but if I went to Central Casting and I wanted to, you know, if I was going to cast like pedophiles, that's what they look like. My worst fears, my worst fears are that. My worst fears is that she was selling the children. And I noticed when all the stuff, when I started uncovering like the bruises and all the stuff's unraveling.
An intake worker came to the door and she said, well, if you don't open the door, there will be harm to you.
CPS caseworkers, politicians, DAs, government agents, judges, foster parents, prosecutors, legislators, doctors, and even the police. They are all involved. How can you fight against such a strategically interconnected, vastly expansive, and collusive system of child abusers? You expose them, one by one by one.
You know, that is, to me, it's such a challenge. Anytime you're putting any kind of a film together, like you said, you don't know when to stop filming. You don't know when you've seen enough. And in this, when you're talking about sex trafficking, every day there's something new. I can hardly stand it myself. I don't know how you're doing the research, and you continue to do this research. I don't know how.
Well, we have a woman that we work with named Heather, and she is like the heartbeat of our motivation to keep doing this research. She doesn't come out a lot on film, and she doesn't, make a lot of content. But I'll tell you right now, if I didn't have Heather and Anthony and, our other research partner, Gabriel, we wouldn't probably have the drive to keep going and doing this. They're just so motivated and so on the ball with what they're looking into, documenting things, keeping everything organized for Anthony and I. It's like they were sent to us from heaven to help. So we're really grateful for that. But I think, like Anthony and myself, it's more to get the awareness out there. So like I try to deflect the emotional part of it, because it will take over your life emotionally.
And I can't even imagine why you would decide to put all your time, your energy, actually your whole life into this. How do you separate your life from this? Or can't you?
Well, I think that from Anthony coming onto the scene, with me, with this documentary, it's given me a new push. And it's not so doom and gloom anymore. There's some hope. We can actually help people. My research before was more so pointing out these people that are working in the government, pointing out these people that are hurting children, and just sharing that it was happening. But it was hard to find a resolution. How do we get these guys? And this is when, at the end of the trailer, Anthony just sums it right up for you, and it gives me goosebumps, and it brings a tear to my eye. You expose them one by one. That's what we're trying to do. So that keeps me strong, and it keeps me from crying at night and eating bonbons all night, and just letting it take over like a monster. You just know that there's hope at the end of the tunnel.
Now, what about you, Anthony? How do you feel about all of this, and how does this connect into your everyday life?
Well, I think some of the, early on I just started on YouTube probably about a little over a year ago. My general plan for what I was going to do on my channel was just to cover the truth. I mean, that was really the ultimate value, the ultimate virtue. And I wanted to do reporting. I wanted to do interviews. I'm still, a journalist in a sense of training to be, it's still kind of new for me. But once we kind of delved into this project, what I really started finding was so awesome was that I've always heard from other people that have done projects like this, not in the sense of the content, but just in the sense of making a documentary, that documentaries, they're great as a tool to organize thought, to share thought, and to have a organized, presented form of really, a good layout of thought. And that in this project, it's been really interesting because it's expanded so far since we've gone into the project. It's became something more than we thought it would have been. And I think that's really been such a big point I wanted to stress to people listening, is that it's a really good project when the experience itself starts to change you so much that itself is what's being documented, and it became much less of us organizing what we already knew, just wanting to present it to people. It became much more of doing things and making action, and all that stuff is very fulfilling for me personally. Ever since I started, it's just, I've found more of a calling with the direction of where I want to bring the fight to, per se.
Don't you find that there's a sense of urgency also while you're doing this, an urgency to get it finished, but an urgency to get this message out there? Because it does fall on deaf ears. This message really does, because people just can only absorb so much of it. And then they go, I can't take it. I can't watch the news. I can't listen to this. I mean, right now, the state of Florida, and you probably well know, is a hotbed. It's finally being recognized as one of the top in child trafficking. We've got the court case that's going on with the Renee, or the young gal that was 8 years old, that was abducted out of a Walmart, and that's finally come to court. And we've got Lauren Book, who is our senator, that's trying to get a lot of different laws into place for children that have been abused, sex trafficked, so on. So we're seeing so much of it. People are trying to come forward, but those that are listening, it's very difficult. And I'm sure you're coming across that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I personally myself, I've edited projects a few times. I've done editing for a while. It's not something new to me, but making a documentary is very, very new to me. And it's been a giant learning process. And with me personally, I consider myself a perfectionist, and it has its negative consequences. And producing it, you have so much criticism on yourself. Is this good enough? Are people going to say this is good enough? But you just kind of really have to go, where your heart takes you, and really the love for these children when we meet these families is what constantly drives me to get up every day and keep working on it. Even though I'm a procrastinator by nature due to I want to do everything perfectly right, therefore I won't start then. So it's been really good for me lately, just evolving my mindset of how actually to handle workloads and all that stuff, and it's just been a great experience overall.
Sure.
I think I was going to expand on that a little bit, on how we're getting out to people and how it should be received. We're really trying to put forth the CPS and court corruption right on the front, because that's what people see. I mean, you can go to the court and you can get the documents. You can see it in the news. This is stuff that is not, crazy woo-woo conspiracy. This is actual stuff that's happening that you can see and find, and we recreate the experiment, so to speak. So with that, I think we're able to grab more of an audience and bring them into this greater issue, which is child sex trafficking and the ways that it's actually happening. And there's a lot of stuff that we haven't talked about yet that we're addressing in our documentary that is probably something that nobody has ever seen or talked about before. So we do have a lot of things that I think will grab people to get them to look at it. Because you're right, it is very difficult to look at it every day.
It is. Now, what about educating? Are you finding that that's an important part in your documentary? How do we educate people how to look for this, how to become aware of it? We know that shooting in our schools is in the forefront right now, and it's getting people to become aware and to see the signs. Are there signs that we can actually see, and look for? Are you able to come across with that in that documentary?
Yeah, well, this is something we always talk about, me, Heather, and Anthony, is that it really has to start in your own town and knowing who your representatives are, knowing who your local government is, knowing the people that are the judges at your court, who are the lawyers that are, your defense lawyers that work for the court, that are given out to people that don't have a lot of money. They work for the court, but they'll defend you in court.
Right.
Because they have to. Those are the kinds of connections that'll bring you to understand how these things are working in a network. That's what we're doing with a lot of these families. We're like going to their local courts. We're going to their trials.
Yeah.
We're talking to the people that are involved. This is what we hope to show people, is they have to take control locally. I mean, we'd love to take down John Podesta and all those guys. We'd love to take down all of these big networks, but you can't do that unless you know what's going on in your own city, in your own town, because that's where it's happening. It's trickling down, and that's where the compartmentalization makes it able to happen. It's just not a couple of people high up in the government that are doing this. They need people that are on the ground, not just the judge, but like the guy that works at the gas station, the guy that works at the school, the woman that works in, the library. Like, they work in tandem with each other to do this stuff. So get to know who's who in your own city and town, and start watching. We sit out at night all night long and do recon missions. I'm on the phone with Heather or Anthony, like sitting out front of some place, just reporting on what I'm seeing and getting documentation. You have to be into it if you want to expose it. You have to look at it if you want to expose it.
And I think sometimes when I listen to these news reports, I'm wondering, are we ever going to be at a position where we can actually prosecute these people? And I think that must be something that you find difficult when you're doing this.
Yeah,
there's
Anthony answer that one.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird ways in how the system is set up, so that whether you're an individual working within CPS or versus the organization as a whole, who actually suffers the legal ramifications of a lawsuit, per se. So we've been kind of going through that itself. And you mentioned earlier about the whole educational process. That's kind of in itself what we've been working on a lot, is trying to show people the history and how this racket has actually been formed. Not only, how the racket works, the MO of how the racket works, where the money's traded off, following the money where it comes from, but also understanding the history of the laws that have been implemented to actually enact this kind of racket to come together. And that's where a lot of it goes back to, 1970s and into the 90s, into Bill Clinton's presidency, where we touched on in the trailer. Understanding what Title IV is, understanding what different positions in CPS are, whether they're supervisors or caseworkers, understanding that the magistrates often come out of networks where they've actually worked in DCF and they've worked in CPS, and they are then promoted to these high level judicial positions. Kind of understanding how that all works is really, in my opinion, the most the biggest, most productive thing you can do to educate yourself on the topic. Beginning to fight these people, beginning to actually make a difference in this case, comes a lot with educating yourself on how it was all formed as a racket and the different individuals as far as their classification of jobs, whether they're in judicial fields, CPS fields, or whatever. Everyone has their specific role when it comes to filing the reports, making the edicts, and certain ways. And I mean, just a learning experience for me myself. I'm not really sure if my other two friends in this project have understood this. They probably do, and probably did before I did. But the whole 6-month mark, where the funding, the Title IV funding, then comes in after 6 months and 1 day, we've learned that many states have that. It's a federal law, so all states have that protocol, and so many times families will be extorted up to that 6-month period, so that federal funding can then come in, versus them actually 4 months. 4 months is not really gonna. It's not really going to get the tax money in to pay off these caseworkers for their bonuses. So that's been a big thing I've come into fruition with.
Wow, it's crazy out there, and of course, when you think about or you discuss fundraising, you have quite an experience in that just on your documentary. Maybe you can share a little of that with us.
Yeah, we've been very modest on what we've been asking for. We figured we would start low and see where people were comfortable in giving, and we usually do it in rounds, so we can do a trip or two, and not, we don't want to exploit the actual fundraising process, because we know it's hard for people to give, especially after Christmas, and you really got to be behind what you're giving to. So we want to make sure that we're credible and people are with us and we're giving them updates and trailers and kind of bringing people in. So we went from, I think the first one we asked for 3, the second one we asked for 6, and this last one that we just put out was for 8. And we pretty much have been half, I think, for each one of them so far. We just started the last one about a week ago, and we're up to a little over 1,000, and we're really, really grateful for that. But we do want to probably make this our final one. I mean, I would like to have over $8,000. I think it would be a lot easier for us, because we work part-time, but the bulk of our work is towards research and doing this stuff and communicating with families and survivors and victims. So, that giving part would really help. I mean, I know I have my own PayPal and Patreon. I depend on that for my bills as well. I know Anthony does too, with his subscribers. So the fundraising kind of separates it as like the team working on the documentary for flights, food, gas, court documents. I mean, man, I dropped like $200 in court documents last time around. They're not cheap. They're not free. When you go to the clerk's office, you have to drop money for paper. They charge you a good amount of money for paper. I know when we were with the Litas in Ohio, they charged us for printing out documents, even at the library. Yeah. So, there are these little expenses that it would help if people want a really great documentary with good camera equipment and good audio, to be involved in giving what they can. We're not asking for a lot. I mean, I've seen people ask for millions of dollars.
You bet. You bet.
$1 million to make a documentary. So.
One thing I want to say is in the months that I've been following you and admiring your work, B, that I think that you really shoot from the hip. I think you're right there in the thick of it. When you say something, it's the real deal. You've done the research. You've done the backwork that it requires to make a documentary. There isn't anyone out there better than you to do something like this. I sincerely mean that. And I think for those viewers that are listening to us right now, I think it is important that you continue this, because there's a real message here. There's a real need here. And we haven't even discussed where your faith is at in all of this, and what you've had to deal with, and the people that you probably have come across, and the experiences that you could share just in the background of doing the documentary. It's like you could do a documentary about the documentary, I'm sure. There's so much there. Maybe you could share just a few things with us, Bea, that you've experienced during this time.
Sure. I think when we started really getting stuff put out there with like the first trailer that we did, and people actually started seeing that we were doing this and that it was actually happening. We started first off like with the technological stuff. I mean, that really puts a weight on us, especially when it's in the form of censorship. And, you know, videos getting taken down, audio not working when you really want it to, financial situations where you're just like, how is this even happening right now at this moment in my life? You know, it's almost like you think twice about it. I'm not like, I like to have documentation, and I like to keep my credibility index, you know, in line so that I'm reaching as many people without any of the fluff. But there are people that don't want us to make this documentary. I personally have been receiving phone calls, death threats pretty regularly. I get wake up calls at 4:00 in the morning every night. I have them all recorded. It's just a standard thing that I deal with. It's been happening since I went after Heart Progress this past summer. My number was out there because I had an LLC, so people were able to find out where I live and what my phone number was. So it's been a little tough on that end. Not for me, like emotionally though, because I figure if they're doing this, it's because we're doing something right. So it actually does the opposite. It motivates me a little bit more. The issue that I have is when, you know, Anthony gets his live streaming taken down, or somebody takes his video down, somebody flags it. You know, that's, you know, like financial stuff that happens to either Heather or Gabriel at the most inopportune time. It doesn't seem to make sense why these things happen at the times that they happen. On that end, you know, there's a lot of evidence. The spiritual part of it, though, I've seen a little bit of personalities kind of changing and creating obstacles personally in my life to make things harder to do this documentary. You know, I'm very faithful Christian in my own way. So when I start seeing things kind of like spiritual attacks and emotional attacks that make it difficult for me to do this, I have to just say a prayer and know that these are obstacles that I can overcome, and that I have power over negative entities or negative energies, and that I'll be able to get through this, you know, just by being strong and faithful. So
Great. How about you, Anthony? Same?
Well, I think with me being very, very young, I'm only 22 years old, so I can't really speak to having so much experience involved with, you know, I think that stuff comes with experience, you know, going through certain things. And I'd have to say that since I've started this project, just seeing the evil underneath, like right in front of us, kind of understanding where the roots of all this stuff is, and it not being such an abstraction, it makes it very real. I've prayed more than I've ever did in my life during this. I've prayed with multiple families on the phone that I've talked to. I've prayed over them. It's just stuff that you really yearn for, that spiritual strength when you come across this kind of content and this stuff. You see how evil people are to actually harm children, and that's one of the most virtuous, most innocent forces of life on this planet. And it aches you. And I can't even imagine if I was even a father, or even had a stepchild or any form of that, how much more that would hurt me. And so just kind of seeing this from like a young person's perspective, it's been very eye-opening, and it's strengthened my faith very much.
Do you honestly believe in your heart that we can really, I understand you're doing the documentary and you have all the right reasons to do it, but do you really think we can make a difference?
Yes. I think that often feeling the whole David versus Goliath abstraction is what disempowers people. I think making a difference is only on the individual level. There is only individuals, collectivism itself is an abstraction. So helping individual families, helping individual kids one by one by one. I mean, someone has to set the example. Someone's got to do it. You can't be Superman for every certain thing in this world. And that's, a lot of people suffer with that complex of, well, I'm not worth enough. I can't do enough. What am I supposed to do about it? Well, it's not just you, rallying everybody together, setting an example to combat these people in the way that, I see Best Fit as shining light on the topic. I see the best way of doing this is putting light on a dark area and exposing people for what they've done. And I think, if your efforts lead to children being saved, and it leads to people being put in prison for wrongly abusing and harming these children and these families, then God bless you. That's exactly what we're here to do on earth. So I think be empowered by that message, if anything, and not disempowered by what you can't do physically on that large of a level,
Let me ask you this. I'm sure you're familiar with the case here in Florida with Donald Smith, the fellow who took the young gal, Cherish, I mentioned her earlier, at a Walmart situation, and took her and raped her, killed her, and buried her. And it wasn't too long after that they did find this young gal. And now he is in court. He did it. He's guilty. He's fighting that it's the mother's fault that she allowed me to take her in Walmart. They were all together. Take her to McDonald's to get a burger, and she was 8 years old, and then turned around and walked out, and blaming the mother for putting the child in this situation where he could take her. How does our judicial system work? I mean, we all want this. We want to see justice served on somebody like this.
I think it's very dangerous when a child is murdered, raped, abducted, whatever has happened to that child, when they start kind of flipping it to like, well, what could the parent have done? We actually dealt with that with the Lita family that we were with in Ohio. A little incident turns into a full-blown attack on the whole family and all the children, where the kids are put into homes where they're abused and neglected. It just doesn't need to get that way. If something needs to be fixed, you deal with the family or whatever. But in this case, this child was raped and murdered by a monster. So whether he broke into the house while the child was sleeping through locked doors, or whether the mom turned her head for a moment, it really is a non-issue. I think, if the child was like walking to the store by herself at 8 years old in a city where she should be, parented or somebody with her watching her, then maybe. But I can't see how they would blame the mother for something like that. That's horrible. And I actually don't know a lot about this case. If you can tell us a little bit more, I'd appreciate that. I just looked it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's Donald Smith. The mother is Renee Periwinkle, and it's really quite a sad story. They don't have a lot of money. She had 3 little girls. They were in a store looking at clothes and purchasing a few things, and she didn't have enough money. Apparently, she was probably at the checkout. She didn't have enough money to pay for these clothes. So he was like a good Samaritan and came to her and said, well, look I don't have a lot of cash on me, but I have a card for Walmart. If you'd like to come with me, we'll go to Walmart and you can purchase a few things that you'd like to get for your girls. And the little 8-year-old probably wanted a pair of boots and a few other things. And she said, well, are you sure you would do this for us? And he said, yes. I mean, she's definitely down and out. This was a nice looking man. And to see him in court last week, I was shocked. Perhaps she might have even thought she could maybe have something going on with this man, to look decent. And I think he said something that his wife was going to be meeting him at Walmart. I didn't quite catch that. But they went to Walmart. They shopped around. It was getting late and the little girls were hungry. So he said, well, come with me and we'll go get some burgers. And, in Walmart, they have Burger King or they have all those little fast foods, and it's really quite close. They've got footage of him taking her, and she's skipping out the door. This happy little girl. She's going to have new clothes, new shoes, whatever. And then he took her to a private area where he violently raped her and murdered her. And it was only a few minutes that she realized her daughter was missing. And she couldn't imagine that this man was a good Samaritan. He was lending her a helping hand financially. So in court, he said, I don't even want her on the stand. I just want everyone to know that she allowed him to take her out of that store.
That's sick that they would.
One of the worst stories, I think, be that I have actually heard, and to make it twisted that this mother would ever allow her child out of her sight.
Well, that's the thing, though. These monsters, because only monsters would do something like this to a child, and there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are in power. The thing that they do is they prey on the vulnerable. They prey on the weak. They prey on people that don't have enough money to take care of their kids. And people have children, and they might not have enough money to have a beautiful home and to go on the vacations and to get their stuff taken care of. That's life. There's people in third world countries that are having children, and they don't have much. We're not like telling them to stop having children. I mean, that's being a human being, is to make more of yourself. And that should be okay. And you shouldn't have to worry about that being turned on you at any point. So for them to, in this case, actually in court in front of everyone and humiliate this mother.
Yeah, make her feel the shame. Can you imagine?
Well, you also, I feel like you also have to keep in mind the mindset of these perpetrators, and keep in mind that half of them don't feel the, I guess, ethic to feel any shame about what they've done. And so you see them cast their blame onto a vulnerable single mother that, depending on a parent of what it means, a few, feet to McDonald's with this man that she thinks is a decent man. How can we cast blame on this mother for assuming that from there you raped and killed? And so that's where it becomes this backwards thing where it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. And it just shows, I think it shows more and more about the mindset of these violators and the lack of morality and ethics. And from that issue, there being no conscience for what they've done. There's no remorse for what they've done. You see that a lot in many cases.
No, and the fact that she thought he liked her. And, as a single mom with 3 little girls, thinking, wow, this is a nice looking man, and he might be interested in me and help me care for my children, or whatever the scenario is, or it happened to be playing out. And you listen to this and you think about people and what they're scheming in their minds and what they're thinking. I mean, the average person wouldn't think that somebody is going through all this to get that little child. I mean, that's a lot of planning. That's a lot of thinking. I mean, to drive them to Walmart, to carry on for 3.5 hours in the store.
Yeah, I think it's actually an isolated case, though. Like, that seems to me like they're trying to make it seem like everybody's got to be afraid of everybody, too. That's one thing that I really am afraid of happening, is that people get more isolated and don't talk to their neighbors and don't know who's in their community. I think that means we have to really start getting to know who we're around, who our children are around, more than ever. And stop this individualism, stop this isolationism. That's what's going to make people, have issues like this, where you're almost like you would trust a stranger because you don't know any better. I mean, I'm sad to say I really don't know a lot of my community. So I've been trying to go online and join like the group, the Plastow community page, and get to know people and, start up a conversation so people know who I am and what I'm doing. I mean, I'm exposing pedophilia and talking to pedophiles on Twitter and YouTube and, calling the police every week and the FBI. I want people to know that I'm doing that. So if it does come down to my computer, like having a link on it that isn't supposed to be there, it's not like I was looking at anything bad. The community knows what I'm doing. They know who I am. And they're going to be like, okay, she's trying to take down the pedophiles. Like that's what's going to make this happen is people start, like I said, it starts in your own community. It starts in your own town. Get to know the people in your town, and open up that conversation.
That is really a good suggestion. I mean, it really is getting to know your neighborhood and your neighbors. Now, Anthony, what do you find that you're seeing the most of as far as the way these pedophiles are going after? Is there something that's comes to your mind? You're kind of a newbie in all this. So what are you seeing that kind of sticks out in your mind?
So speaking along the lines of like how exactly they decide to acquire these children, like their MO or their strategy, you mean?
Yeah, and what are you seeing more of? I mean, are you seeing more of them working in one particular way?
What I see a lot, and maybe this is my perception from, I've ran through so many articles, so many events in different states, and I've looked through them, the details of them. But what I often see is that these people are they're either in positions of power, and that doesn't have to be some major position of power, even though that often it is. But just generally, like, a teacher at a daycare, something where their power, with power comes great responsibility, we know. So, a teacher at a daycare, it's a very responsible position amongst many, many kids. It could be the nice looking, attractive man that is trustworthy when you put your eyes on him. And when you talk to him, they operate on a psychopathic level. They understand how to talk to people. They understand how to cloak their personalities amongst people. And it's these people that often I'm seeing are the people that are often being caught, if they are caught. It's people at daycares. It's people that are potential foster parents that go on to do the same thing. And what I've found most in my project, that's what we've obviously been focusing on the most, is CPS's role in this facilitation and handing off the kids to homes where these kids are going to be abused and neglected. I mean, I know if we're talking right back to the Lita case again, I just got a email from them the other day ago about a recorded conversation with their oldest, JJ. He's just the smartest kid you can meet. And he was talking about the fact that, as punishment, these kids go straight to their bed. If they didn't eat that day, they didn't eat. They go straight to their bed and they go to sleep. And that's their punishment. And they only eat a certain amount of times a day. They only get a certain amount of kind of food. These children are largely neglected. And speaking on a personal level in my own life, I mean, I have a grandparent who is a foster child. The same thing happened. He was neglected. He wasn't fed. They were punished for going downstairs to the refrigerator and taking food if they were hungry. Things that any other parent would be lied about. Tell them that that's not what you're supposed to do, but these foster parents, whoever these people are, these abusers, they're in it for the cash half the time, and that requires them, making their fridges less available, their expenses, cutting out their expenses for the children. I mean, it is a money-making business unlike no other, and it's no different from any other business that you'd make a big amount of, commission check from doing something. So it's really sad in that sense, I guess. And, that's mostly, I see it's people in positions of power or in a sense of responsibility that they have to uphold.
Let's talk about statistics. I know we didn't have a chance to discuss that. Are we still looking at 5.5 million worldwide?
Traffic.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's a conservative estimate is what I would say, because that's probably based on, well, I know for instance, that comes from UNICEF. And their estimation is just one estimation. There's actually a lot of different estimations as to how to acquire that number. I think it's personally way over 5.5, but what they've estimated from that statistic is that it's around 5.5. But we have yet to actually uncover some of these terrible, terrible rackets that seem to be hidden incognito. And so once you start to include that within your statistics, it changes numbers. What you see is not exactly there. It's kind of the iceberg effect, everything underneath is much larger than what you're looking at.
Yeah. And for instance, like, Anthony was speaking about the CPS and how trafficking can happen there. I mean, just looking at that arrests of those 474 in California last February, most of if not all of those people, half of them were children, were involved in foster care. They don't talk about that, but that is the reality of the situation, that these kids were in the care of the state and being prostituted out to Johns and whatnot. But then you look at the kids foundations for underprivileged children, for struggling children, for kids with special needs. I mean, look at Sandusky and what he was doing with those little boys. I mean, these kids looked up to him and wanted to be like him. They wanted to be football players and go to college at Penn State. These are people that are in positions of power that put themselves around kids to have access to them. Same thing with Dennis Hastert and any other high profile pedophile that you see that amazingly was brought to court, 20 years later because somebody decided to, finally let this person come and speak, and stand up and say something. And sometimes it takes 15, 20 years to become an adult and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that this was abnormal behavior. No one ever told me that, the coach was not supposed to be touching me there, taking showers with me alone. This was a rich, powerful man. Like, why would I think that it was abnormal? It takes time. And that's why we're really pushing for Washington State right now to have the statute of limitations abolished for sex crimes against children. Because after a certain amount of time, you can't take them to court, even if you were brutally raped, and have evidence. That's just ridiculous. If I murdered someone 20 years ago, you bet your ass they're going to take me to court and make me serve time if they have evidence. And I look at it as the same thing. You're destroying and killing the soul of a child by doing that to them. And that's a whole nother level of the pedophilia normalization that is going on, that is extremely troubling. And that's mainly what I focus on my social media, is because there is an active effort, a strong effort with academia involved, with local government-funded agencies, aka NARSOL, previously the Center for Sexual Justice, the State Access Board in Washington, D.C. Okay, these are places that want to help the pedophiles feel like we're including them, much like the LGBT has worked very hard to get that inclusion, to have people understand that they're people too, and they deserve rights. They should be able to be married. They should be able to have children. Right. Pedophilia is not the same. This is a dangerous narrative. And there are people that are gathering and grouping and creating YouTube channels and Twitter accounts and web pages and foundations to have America wrap their arms around the pedophile, the pedosexual, minor attracted people that are virtuous pedophiles, whatever titles they're giving themselves. This is a dangerous, dangerous narrative that needs to be nipped in the butt, because this is what the higher ups want that are actually running these rackets for children. They want pedophilia to be normalized. They want it to be legal for kids to have no curfew, to divorce their parents. Go take a look at what NAMBLA's bylaws, when they came with BAM and the RWL, the communist groups that joined forces with NAMBLA on how we can get the youth to be independent from their parents so we can take them and brainwash them to do what they want them to do, to have access to them. Okay, this is a very, very important part of this, because it takes the government, it takes CPS, it takes underprivileged kids in these foundations where the after school programs, and it takes this kind of racket, especially with these pedophiles trying to normalize pedophilia as a whole and lower the age of consent so they can have our kids. This is all encompassing. And this is why we're doing this documentary, is to bring it all together, because it's all very relevant.
I do see a lot of this movement in California. be, that they're trying to get these laws passed, and they just got one law that was passed where those that were convicted no longer have to have this on their record. So they can live anywhere in privacy, and no one has to know in your neighborhood if you have someone that's living by you that's a pedophile. And
Also,
I don't even know how many years it took us to get that law into effect. And that's what's so sad.
And if I may add too, because I think Mellisa really hit it on the head there when she was talking about the story involving 474 people swept up in California with the raids. This kind of goes back to the question you were asking, Rox, when you were saying, what is the statistical estimation of how this problem is manifesting in the world? And we said, conservatively, maybe 5.5 million. This just is to show you that and you can go on the Truth Movement online, and there's plenty of people that disagree with what I'm saying, and that's fine. But you can see that those 474 arrests, how is it reported in the media? Well, it was reported that it was a bunch of just random Johns, and it was these low-level people that were just consumers of, illegal sex trade. When, me and Mellisa have had conversations with people involved in law enforcement that they have inside information where they have shown us pictures of some of the kids that were actually found in those busts. So it's really annoying for me to hear online when people say, oh, well, don't report about that. That's actually just to trick us all. There wasn't kids found there. You're a dupe. It's like, no, like if people can't understand that from that news story, then where do you think our estimations lie? They have to be inaccurate, because we don't truly, even what's reported is inaccurate, So, I mean, even to just bring it back in the trailer, that one image that you saw of Doug Hagman showing up on a photograph of a kid in a cage, that was from that event. Yeah. Okay. So just so everyone watching understands that, there's many people online that want to detract from it and say, oh, let's not celebrate all the pedogate researchers are celebrating that these people were caught. We should be. There's some of these people online that are just saying this was nothing. And it's a shame to see that level of disinformation spread.
Yeah, Craig Sawyer just arrested a federal agent who was trying to buy a little girl and has it on camera. Go check out Craig Sawyer and the Veterans for Child Rescue and what they're doing. I mean, this is real stuff. And it's not just, preteen girls that are prostituting, because they're homeless or on the street. I mean, these are people that are kidnapped, from the ages of 4, 3, 2 years old up until they're 29 years old, like that family where they have their kids chained up in their house. Yes. 29 years old. Could you imagine?
No, not even being fed.
I mean, this is really insidious stuff that is, it's not, these kids don't want it. Okay. This is not these are not the droids you're looking for. Whatever narrative that they're trying to create about these arrests, they're serious, and there's real people that are being exploited beyond what you can believe, beyond.
And I hope that people don't get it screwed up. It's not sex. We're not talking about sex. We're talking about the actual act of abusing a child or an adult. What kind of money are we looking at that they can actually make? I know we've heard it, but maybe you can give us a little update on some of this, because when you're saying that it's gotten so out of control, this is an epidemic, what are they making? I mean, if a child is having sex 10, 20, 30, 40 times a day, obviously there's a great deal of money involved in this. If our government is hiding it.
Well, I'm going to let Anthony answer the question on the CPS end of it, because there's a lot of money that's made there per child. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the actual footage that people are buying and what they're paying for sex.
So I guess to preface it before I talk about some of the CPS money that's involved, just to step back from the issue for a second, just to look at this illicit trade in a way that it's different from other illicit trades. Much like selling drugs, for instance, when you sell drugs, you make a profit, but you then lose that drug. It's an official trade. You no longer have it to use it further for more revenue, more profit making. So when you look at this, you're looking at a product, for lack of better word, that can be used again and again and again and again and again, and you'll never expend that product. There's no loss from that trade, from that market. It's extremely profitable just by that characteristic. So then to go into the CPS aspect of it, I mean, it's the fact that largely most of this money is not just coming from black market, initiated trades. They're not just saying, hey, I'm just going to, spend this much. The government is setting down the bid. The government is pushing in federal tax dollars, and they're giving it to those that are actually responsible in the facilitation of children before they can then be put into those families where that stuff kind of happens. So, you're looking at literally bonuses of between $2,000 to $10,000, depending on the nature of your kid, whether your kid is a normal kid, whether your kid, in the definition of normal in the sense of mental health, has mental health issues, or they are, in their terms, they will say over-parentified or under-parentified. They have many different linguistic tricks that they put people through with these cases to actually inflate the price of these kids that they are taking in. So even in the case with the Litas, we've experienced that all 5 of these kids are great kids, very smart, articulate.
5 kids.
5 kids. Yeah. And they all, by the way, can walk, know how to eat, and all use utensils, all 3 of which that I just told you are the opposite of what CPS has reported. They reported that they cannot use utensils. They reported that, some of them have learning on the point of a learning curve. There was another report about, if they need medications, that's another thing that invites a lot more money in of federal dollars. So you can see how the incentive really lies with, it's synonymous with fabrication of evidence. So if you can fabricate that these things are the case, which you don't need substantiation for in these courts, you can just say it and it's hearsay, and that hearsay alone decides an actual edict on part of that kid being special needs, being, some form of, well, we got to invite more tax dollars for this particular kid.
A lot of people, or a lot of our viewers, might not know about the Lolita case. Maybe you can share a little background of this case with our listeners, and then how you actually got involved with this case.
Yeah. So the Lolita case, they were actually our most recent trip that we took to Ohio. They originally, I got in contact with them a few months before, and we discussed a lot over the phone. We had many conversations for 3 hours, just kind of going through the progression of their case, what happened, the whole story behind it. So anyone who's listening that doesn't know the story, in a nutshell, it's basically that, their youngest child decided to walk outside their house. The door was left unlocked, unfortunately, as the father was going to get food for the family. And keep in mind, the mother at that time had just gotten out of the hospital. She was bedridden with an extremely deathly condition of vitamin B deficiency, which we all know that takes all of your energy away. Sure. And he was just in his right mind going to get food for the family. He made a mistake. He didn't lock the door completely, and the 2-year-old did get out, and she walked two houses down the street, and this is a cul-de-sac. Now, this is where it all starts, because within the actual case itself, it was reported that the child walked up to 10 houses down the street. So you see all these discrepancies of fabrication of evidence all over these reports. And from that one event, all 5 of their kids were taken from them. All 5 of their kids were taken from them. And the CPS agent, shockingly enough, and this is in the trailer if anyone watching wants to view, came to the door and asked to be let in, and Mrs. Lita, the mother, who's very versed in the law and understands her rights, said no. And the caseworker said, well, if you do not let us in, there will be harm done to you, word for word.
Oh.
And that's when it kind of shocked her, intimidated her enough to open the door. And at that point, a CPS case had been enacted because she had then entered the household, and, you know, multiple other reports, you know, being typed up about this and that and this and that, and just justifying reasons to keep these children out of their custody. I remember when me and Mellisa went there, personally myself, I was very hopeful, but I felt very discouraged at the same time, that these kids were going to come home. I mean, it really saddened me while I was there. I did not think that was going to be the case. And ultimately it was like a God-sent blessing to be there to witness in the courtroom these kids being returned back to the family, and to witness, you know, the mothers and the mother and the father just crying with overwhelming joy. And just to see that all happen, and to review the documents, to see the lying in front of your eyes. We're highlighting the lies, we're tracking everything. And then next thing you know, we're at this court hearing and they release the kids. And like I said before, the 6 month and 1 day period is what they actually kept these kids up to, so that regardless if they released him, the federal funding is still on its way. So, you know, it was a way for them to break even, per se, in their,
and by the way,
view.
The kids knew a few days. Nicole just texted me yesterday and told me that their kids told them that they knew at school 3 or 4 days before the court date that they were going home. So this is the racket. This is something they do often. They get them in care for 6 months, and then the foster parent is guaranteed. Now think about this: 5 kids, and they were claiming that each kid was like $800 a month or something like that she was getting. Think about how much money that is. And then to be guaranteed that with no children living there. You know, she's got to be divvying it up with other people that were working with her. There's a woman that we're looking into that would never communicate with the family, that was kind of like seedy and shisty. And she was a part of the Lighthouse Foundation that was, you know, overseeing, contracted out, you know, by CPS. They use these little private entities to do all of their bidding. This is the kind of racket. This is where we're seeing this racket, is that there's this whole setup, you know, legally. It's like legal racketeering. It's not legal, but they've got it set up so that it's legal for them, that they can get this money. And for 6 months, this woman and all of her cohorts can divvy up the payment. That's how it works.
And it was shocking to just see, you know, for instance, in my view, I was thoroughly shocked to look into the magistrate and understand that this person in this position of judicial power, who determines everything with the proceeding of the case, basically, previously worked for DCF. I mean, this person literally was an associate with these people before. And some of these caseworkers that were involved in the Lita family's case, which, by the way, they went through, I believe, 4 or 5 caseworkers. One of these caseworkers actually was placed a child in a family, a foster family, that those foster parents eventually ended up murdering the child. Okay, so subsequently, that caseworker was then promoted to supervisor position. Okay. Now, that little snippet of a story right there is also, you can also view it under the magistrate's case, because the magistrate, who we won't say her name, she also has a separate civil case where she has been charged with, it was actually kidnapping and racketeering, if I'm right about that. That's how it was officially called on the papers, was kidnapping and racketeering. So you've got people that they've been here before. They facilitated this all before. And I think they were genuinely shocked. They were genuinely shocked by, not only, it wasn't really me and Melissa's some superhero we swept in and took the kids back. I mean, these parents fought so hard to get their kids back. They were calling every day. They recorded all the calls. They recorded the visitations at their own house. And these agencies and the government, they knew that these are not the people to screw around with. Most of these families would be so beaten down and disempowered by the amount of extortion and lies and threats that they would have been receiving in these cases. But this family was so strong. They fought so hard till the end that once we did decide to show up and we were in that courtroom with them and we stood up and introduced ourselves, people in that courtroom understood exactly what was going on and that they had a support team behind them that we're going to get these kids back.
Wow, what a story. So, B, I know you were going to share some statistics with us as well. So,
sure, yeah. So, if there's a case of Peter Scully, he was out in, he's from Australia, but he was in the Philippines, and he was running a child pornography business there. He would take the children from the local towns, and I'm assuming because Daisy, I don't know what her nationality is. I never saw the video called The Destruction of Daisy. This was a case where the child actually survived these snuff type films where Peter Scully was putting them online. And in the case, these videos were going for $10,000 a pop. So just think about only having like 4 or 5 people interested in purchasing this video. First of all, you want to ask, who has $10,000 to spend on like a 3-hour-long video? It's not me. It's not somebody that works at the local restaurant. These people that have $10,000 to just drop on a video. All right, so let that sink in a little bit.
Yeah, really.
And getting the money for it.
That's frightening.
You can see how the adoption, the way it's all set up in America, is really the easiest route to get adopted children to go elsewhere into other countries. And you can even see certain instances in places like Haiti, for instance, where we have better public relations with the country of the forgetting the name here.
Well, you could just say Hillary.
Yeah, basically.
Thank you, Hillary.
We have better relations. We have better relations with the Dominican Republic. That's what I was trying to say. Caught Democratic and Dominican, but that country alone, we have really good relationships with. We have a U.S. embassy there. We have a lot of State Department regulations and actions and ambassadorships that are in the Dominican Republic. It's a very booming economy as compared to Haiti. But since it's on the same exact island, there is a lot of trafficking in that country between the poorer nations into the more wealthier nations. And you can see from that instance with Laura Silsby, the associate, very, very close to the Hillary Clinton campaign, where the Hillary Clinton campaign was actually talking about that story. They were actually talking about kind of damage control with the story and like what to do next. And that stuff happening, it just paints a picture for how easy it is for children that are in America to actually be adopted out to other countries where they won't be looked after in the same way either with their legal systems. So I find that, with the statistic of America being the largest producer as well as consumer of child abuse content in the world should say a lot as to where the source comes from, and that's where we're trying to expose it.
Anthony, are we really the largest supplier of sex?
Yeah, according to missingkids.org, which is actually the site for NCMEC, we are the largest producer and consumer of child sex abuse content in the world. That is according to a statistic from NCMEC, of whom a company that, to be quite frank, I don't really trust that much, but they do have statistics that I would probably assume are pretty accurate. I thought that was pretty shocking in itself, considering this country, people think this country is a very, very, very safe place, and largely civilized. We are. And we are.
Being very civilized, that we wouldn't prey into this. But not to disrupt you, but I even heard today that the public school systems are finding sex tapes in their computers.
Yeah, and I think
it's floating everywhere. You think
that's like the over sexualization. I mean, pornography you can find it anywhere. You don't have to pay for pornography, and a lot of it is child pornography. I'm sorry, but It's so available. It's really scary, to be honest with you, how available it is without having to go on the dark web. And
so like,
go ahead.
Like a lot of the, like I would say there's many tiers of the industry that are here in America. You have, the porn industry in America is ginormous. So you have naturally you're going to have subsects of that industry that are illicit. You also have child pornography itself is used often by intelligence agencies for operations to hold blackmail against people, and we know that from stories coming out with that too, and congressmen, mayors, different political officials, getting thrown in jail for actually having that content on their computers or actually being involved in doing it at motels or stuff like that. So there's different forms that contribute to the larger equation of why America is the largest producer and consumer. And, I personally think with the intelligence agencies, that's really the open frontier of exposure that we have to get to the bottom of. That'll probably be the hardest, is to root out the evil of all the politicians that are serving in this country. A large amount of them have been blackmailed, and they're being controlled for what they say. And I think that at a certain point in this country, we'll look back at it as a historical moment when 10 to 20% of our politicians fail in their glory to go to jail because they've got pornography on their computers and are convicted of horrible sex crimes against children.
Will we ever prosecute them?
And that's the other thing. We actually have seen a lot of legal maneuvering with the executive branch and making executive orders that are actually enacted to freeze the assets of people that are involved in any human rights abuse. So even unknowingly profiting from it, if you're unknowingly profiting from it, and that's how you want to formulate the case in your defense in court, all your assets are frozen according to this executive order. So we do see kind of an effort being laid out. I would call it like a roadmap, like it's kind of legal road mapping, so that when something or someone or some entity is broke apart and exposed, that there will be actually there will be a formulation of how to proceed with that, better than to have them escape their charges and all this stuff that we've seen countless times.
Well, personally, I'd like to see it start with our judges. I'd like to see it go to the very top and bring them all down, because I don't think they want to convict. And if the judges don't want to convict, we've got a big problem.
You're absolutely right. That's where you start. Where you start.
HoneyBee, I've seen your trailer. I'm loving it.
I watch it probably 3 or 4 times a day. And I call Anthony after, and I'm like, this is so good. You did such a good job. But if you go to the trailer, in the description, you'll find where our fundraiser page is. We actually started using Plum Fund as opposed to You Caring, because we were censored on You Caring. Even though we did 2 rounds, they shut us down. And we even started with another email. Another person set it up, and they shut us down again. And they actually sent Anthony an email again, so they know that we're working together. So they're on to us, I guess, if you want to say on to us. They do not want any part of the truth coming out there. And that's really sad. So we're with Plum Fund now, and we're really liking that. This is the same thing that happened with Craig Sawyer. He was shut down off of GoFundMe, and he had to go to You Caring. Now we're leaving You Caring, and we have to go to Plum Fund right now as well. So Craig Sawyer, hopefully, I'd love to get him on an interview. He's doing very similar things, if not more, on the ground. So hopefully we'll be seeing him when we go to Arizona in a few weeks.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we'll certainly be posting where to see your video.
Awesome.
But whatever you need from us, we've got your back, so to speak.
Thank you.
And I just thank you so much. And Anthony, kudos to you. You did such a great job on the editing. And I know Mellisa, that you were behind it all. And
Oh, no, I wasn't behind it all. But, I do have a good sized platform. And that's what I'm really hoping that a lot of us can do is use our large platforms to get the awareness out. And that's why I want to include a lot of our research network, the Truth Movement, have people like Craig Sawyer and Ben Swan and get everybody talking about it together to get the information out there as a collective. And I think that's as a responsibility as someone that could reach, 16, 17, 18,000 people. This is what I choose to focus on, because to me, it's the absolutely most important thing that we can do for our children is to make this known.
Well, B, that would be causing quite a buzz. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys, for sharing with us. And the time goes by just too fast when I have you.
It's always a pleasure.
Come back again.
Yeah, it definitely was a pleasure. And thank you guys so much. We love you.
Tell Robin we said hi.
I will. God bless.
Take care.